Negative emotions are part of life, and teaching them how to deal with it in a very healthy way has really built up their resilience. But it takes practice. Parents can teach their kids resiliency by modeling their own behavior.
Welcome to the Reclaim Your Rise podcast. My name is Lauren Bongiorno, nationally board certified health coach and founder and CEO of Risely Health, where we help people and families impacted by type 1 diabetes take ownership over their lives so that they can transform with more freedom and confidence. Everyone has a different reason to be here. You might be seeking knowledge, support, or community, but at your core, I know that you long for something deeper. You're here for transformation. And that's what the Reclaim Your Rise podcast is all about. A quick reminder before we start the show that nothing you hear on the Reclaim Your Rise podcast should be a substitute for personalized professional medical advice. Please always consult your physician or other medical professional before making any changes to your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Reclaim Your Rise. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Parents and caregivers of children with type 1 diabetes, this episode is for you. Today, my guest is Dr. Maureen Peterson, a general pediatrician and immunologist, coach, and author who has spent her career caring for patients with a variety of acute and chronic health conditions. On a personal level, when Dr. Maureen was a pediatric resident, her infant daughter, Kylie, was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, which is a form of cancer. And she lived in a world filled with surgeries, chemotherapy, lines, tubes, and medications, and really allowed the stress and chaos of parenting a child with a medical challenge to completely consume her. And despite that being one of the hardest times in Dr. Maureen's life as a mom, in a way it prepared her for when years later, Kylie would be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so in this episode, Dr. Maureen and I talk about the shock and grief of diagnosing your child with type 1 diabetes, tools and strategies to avoid caregiver burnout, the most important thing to consider when your child with type 1 is going through puberty, and how Kylie's diagnosis has made Dr. Maureen a stronger healthcare provider and what you as a caregiver can learn from it as well. So without further ado, help me welcome today's guest, Dr. Maureen Peterson, and let's rise. Dr. Maureen, thank you so much for being here with me today. We're so excited to have you on the show.
I am excited to be here. Thank you, Lauren, for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
Of course. I actually, I didn't know about you before you had wrote in and said, hey, I feel really aligned, would love to come on your show and share my story. And then in looking, up your background and everything, I saw that you actually have a book titled Reclaiming Life. Is that correct? And I thought, well, then you're the perfect person to have on the show because reclaiming your rise, reclaiming life, it just goes together. So I would love for you to kick us off by sharing a story of a time that you reclaimed your rise as a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes, a time where you just felt like, all right, I'm overcoming the challenges and something that just sticks out in your mind.
Yeah, I would say just in reflecting on that question, it kind of leads to what I teach my patients and clients. And that is, every challenge we have a choice. It can either be that life is happening to us and we crawl into a corner and we pretend like it's just going to go away, or we have a choice to have life happen for us and really turn that challenge into a gift to where life is happening for us and we're learning from it and growing. Um, in terms of type 1 diabetes, my daughter's a type 1 diabetic, and it has really been a challenge that has been a gift, though. It has made me a better mom, a better doctor, a better partner in life. And, one kind of quick story that kind of illustrates that is one day we were going to an endocrinology visit as a follow-up, and the during the visit, the endocrinologist was asking my daughter, what happened on this day when you were high? Did you count the carbs correctly? Like, did you underbolus? Like, what happened? And my daughter kind of shrugs, and then the endocrinologist was like, "Well, what about here? Like, what do you think happened here?" And she again like shrugs, and this kind of continues, and we leave the visit, and I have a pediatric background, so have taken care of lots of kids with type 1 diabetes in my professional life. And as we're driving home from the visit, I say to my daughter, like, "Hey, look, you're doing great, but you just really, anytime you have a high or a low, you just have to think back, like, what did I do? Did I, add the right amount of insulin? Did I count the carbs? Was I anxious about something?" All the things. And she just starts crying. And I was like, "No, sweetheart, like, you're doing great. Like, what's the matter? Like, what are the tears for?" And she's like, "Mom, I just want to be a teenager. I don't want to have to think about all of these things all of the time." And I tell you, Lauren, like, at that moment, there was such a light bulb that went on in my head, because for me, as a medical professional, I was thinking, we just need data to figure out what's going on here, not realizing the emotional impact that that has on the patient on trying to collect this data. And in that moment, like I said, it taught me how to be a better mom, on really understanding my daughter's emotions, and how to be a better doctor and approach my patients with a little more compassion and understanding what they're going through minute by minute, day by day, week by week.
Mm, I love that story so much. Thank you for sharing that and just acknowledging how much of a mental toll it is on not only people living with type 1 diabetes, but I think on the parents as well. And oftentimes I hear from a lot of parents who their mental toll is often placed on really the blood sugar roller coasters and the them feeling attached to really the outcomes of their child, but they're not always feeling also just like the mental ups and downs of what it feels like to live with diabetes on a 24/7 basis. So everybody who's involved in the child's life is experiencing it, but just in a different way. I'm curious to go back a little bit to when your daughter was first diagnosed, because I think that listening to everything that you just shared now, it was probably not right out of the bat, right out of the gate. And, hearing that, okay, I'm feeling like I have openness to understand and to listen in this way. And it was probably a grieving stage and a lot of different emotions. And so I would love to hear more about what her diagnosis was like.
Oh, sure. So I will even go back further in time, that, I, as a child, grew up with kind of two real dreams: the dream of being a doctor and the dream of being a mom. And I was very fortunate, got to achieve both of those dreams. During my pediatric residency, my daughter, who's my second child, was 6 months old at the time. She was diagnosed with pediatric neuroblastoma, which is a type of pediatric cancer. My world at that time like came crashing in, because I had cared for neuroblastoma patients, and I knew all the complications that could go on with chemo and surgery and the whole works, and what life expectancy was looking like. And I became consumed with being overwhelmed and scared and guilty, and all the emotions. Things got better with time. She went through surgery, chemo, the whole works, did great. And with time, as we got farther away from that diagnosis, my emotions around it got better. They never totally went away, but it got better. Then, when she turned 12, right around the age of 12, She was drinking a lot, peeing a lot, and it was over the course of a weekend when I had Gatorades in my refrigerator, and I never buy Gatorade. I only had them in there because I had run a race that weekend and they were left over from the race. And so it was a treat for my kids to have this in the fridge, and she was drinking it, going to the bathroom. And I was like, wow, like this is a lot. And so I, in my role as a pediatrician, was like, sweetheart, are you having pain when you pee? Are you peeing a normal amount? Like anything weird? And she's like, no, it's just normal. I'm like, okay. So that happened on a Sunday. Monday, she went off to school and she went to a school for the arts for ballet. And from school, texted me and said, Mom, you need to bring home whatever you need because something is wrong. I have peed 12 times today. And so in my mind, because I knew our history of having gone through the whole cancer diagnosis, I knew she clearly has a urinary tract infection because she can't be that unlucky
Mm,
to have another bad thing happen to her.
mm,
So I wanted to diagnose her urinary tract infection at her school so I didn't have to go all the way home to get her antibiotics. So I get a urine cup and a urine dipstick from the clinic. I drive it over to her school and she meets me at the front desk and says, did you get it? Did you get it? And I said, yeah, here, go into the bathroom, pee in this cup. So then she calls me in afterwards, and in this tiny school bathroom, I dip her urine and I take out the dipstick, and like she had tons of glucose in her urine. And I immediately like knew what that was, began crying, and she has no idea why in the world I'm crying. And she says, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And
mm.
I said, "Well, you have type 1 diabetes." And she, kind of in shock, not really knowing what she should be doing in that moment, like says to me, "Am I gonna die?" And I said, "No, no, no, you're not gonna die." And so she said, "Well, why are you crying, Mom?" And I said, "Because I don't want you to have diabetes." And that was the start in that tiny school bathroom of our journey with T1D.
Oh my goodness. It's like you knew right away. And I want to go back to something that you said where you had treated a lot of patients and kids who had type 1 diabetes. And it's so different when then your child gets it. And on top of that, you thought you already had, hit the her challenge of her life, which was the cancer when she was younger. And so how do you deal in that moment with the kind of unfairness or the perceived unfairness of her getting diabetes and diagnosed at that point? Like, what did the weeks after look like for you, the months after, and also what did it look like in terms of what you showed her and what you like kind of hid behind closed doors?
Yeah, so, in that moment, the kind of unfairness of life, I'm sure it was kind of there, but there's this like shock and overwhelm and like, oh my God, like we have got to do all of these things that I have taught to patients before, and now it's going to become part of my daily life. And so the emotion that comes with having this unfairness, I think, came later. But I had gone through this cancer diagnosis before, and I went into a very dark place during that time and did not want to go back to that place when this diagnosis of diabetes came about. So I really took on a kind of proactive approach to taking care of myself in addition to learning what we were going to have to do every day and teaching that to my daughter and maintaining, all of the things that go along with the new diagnosis of diabetes. So taking care of myself um, had to become a priority because I knew there's no cure for diabetes. And this was going to be the change of our life forever. It's almost this grieving of this kind of past life and past dream that you had for your kid has just died, and you have to go through all the stages of grieving. And I did that really through a lot of podcasts, actually, and getting into coaching and learning about coaching and having a coach and being able to really understand my own thoughts and mind, and really understanding that caring for myself as a parent is not only something that needs to be done, it's something I had to do, and it's not a luxury. And taking care of myself, I'm not talking about like spa days. Yeah, those are great. But just, doing simple things like taking a few moments to journal about all of my worries about her blood sugars or what life was going to have to look like because of diabetes now. And doing that really helped. But, Lauren, I will tell you what's really interesting on looking back is like how the universe like sets us up for success if we allow it. And what I mean by that is that I look at that cancer diagnosis and it was prepping me for everything that goes into being a parent of a type 1 diabetic. And the
Mhm.
having that diagnosis like was prepping me to make me a better doctor and allowed me to really understand what coaching is about and allowed me to really help others on their journey. And all of that, like it again goes back to challenges are really gifts that we can grow from in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like to think of it as, right, everybody has their challenge in life, and this is ours specifically. And, it's really interesting, the cancer and the type 1 diabetes diagnosis. We have had, especially in the last year, at least 5 clients who have had both cancer and type 1 diabetes, and not always in the same order. So some people have cancer first and then their type 1 diabetes diagnosis after, and then other people type 1 diabetes, first and then their cancer diagnosis after. And in all of those people, they say the same things, where it doesn't matter what came first, but just the challenge in itself and understanding what that means for their body, and maybe for the first time, like really just recognizing like our health is really everything, and if we don't have that, like we don't really have anything else. And so how important that is, like it just prepares you for whatever comes next. And I think that's generally, it doesn't have to be a diagnosis. I think also for people with type 1 diabetes, you can look at, okay, well, what was another time in your life where you felt like whatever came your way was impossible and it was drowning you, and you're like, I don't know when it's going to get better from here. And you can use that as an example to say, well, I got through that, and like this is no different, and I can apply those skills that I learned there of resilience and of trusting the process, and leaning into what I can learn from it, and not just, trying to push it away. Like it's all applicable to all different scenarios of your life. So you seem to be at a place right now where you are extremely resilient in how you parent. And I imagine you're passing that on to your daughter as well, and your other 2 kids. What do you think, what does resilience mean to you, and how do you develop that as a parent?
You're right. I do feel like I'm at a place of resiliency. And I would say one of the biggest things that has helped me and helped my kids become resilient is really being vulnerable. And What I mean by that is, oftentimes as parents, we want to be the strong one for our kids and not allow our kids to see that we are scared or see that we are overwhelmed or see us stressed, even though they really kind of do. Um, but, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and share, like, "Hey, I am having a bad day. This was really an overwhelming visit at the pharmacy, and I am stressed right now." And, uh, me saying that has not only helped me personally become resilient in terms of understanding my own kind of thoughts and emotions, but it also has allowed my kids to know you are not expected to go through life having just a kind of uh, force field where you're not experiencing life, that you're protected from all of these negative emotions. Negative emotions are part of life, and teaching them how to deal with it in a very healthy way has really built up their resilience. But it takes practice. Parents can teach their kids resiliency by modeling their own behavior and protecting their kids from having the experience of these emotions does the opposite. Like, it teaches them what we don't want them to learn.
No, absolutely, and I think you're right. You want to shield your child, and it's never your dream when you have a kid to wish anything, bad health wise upon them. But looking and tying back to what you said earlier, where it's like life is happening for us and not to us. When that does happen, it's like, okay, this is here, and how can we, look at the positives? And I think hearing the stories of people like you or me or anybody else on podcasts, who have lived with type 1 diabetes for many years, or for your case have, had a child with type 1 diabetes, you can see that, like, there's hope, right? There's hope that it's not going to be this dark place forever. So for you, and I guess your relationship with your daughter, like, how has that grown over the years? How has it changed over the years? Curious to know.
Yeah, so, my daughter now has had diabetes for the last 11 years. So she's 23. Again, she's an example of somebody that has taken the challenge of type 1 diabetes and turned it into a gift. She is a medical student and is getting her MD, PhD, and is currently studying autoimmune disease, and studying the immune system for her PhD part of that. Um, I have no doubt that she will be part of the reason that we figure out a cure for type 1 diabetes. I have an awesome relationship with her. It has had its ups and downs for sure, because when you take type 1 diabetes in a time when a teenage child is going through puberty, you create a hurricane, that you have emotions that are influenced by high blood sugars and low blood sugars, but then you have emotions that are regulated also by all the hormone changes that are going on. And then you have emotions that are influenced by all the peer pressure that's going on during that developmental stage too. So it was a challenge to be a parent of a T1D during those adolescent years, uh, because you never knew which child was going to walk through the door, and you never knew what the reason was for, the Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, that is coming in. But, uh,
Oh, yes.
understanding again that you can give love to your child And that love that you continually give unconditionally will make everything okay in the end. That no one stays in their teenage years forever, and that relationship will survive the adolescent years if a parent continues to just allow emotions and allow communication. Um, sometimes when kids aren't doing well at school, their parents are like, well, you're going to be on restriction because your grades aren't great. But a better approach is, if
Mhm.
they're not doing well in school, like, what's going on? Do you not like this class? Does the teacher not teach well? Like, why are you not is it your blood sugars during this period of your schedule? Like, what's going on? And so allowing curiosity to have a place in communication allows for a great relationship in the end.
Wonderfully said. I think a lot of times we forget that for me, I was a child. Like I was that child that I think, my mom could relate a lot to what you just shared. I mean, she would walk through, I'd walk through the door exactly like that, just a storm. And she'd be like, you better hope your blood sugar is high right now. Go check it. And I'd be like, I hope it's high. I hope it's high. But, I think, it's hard to forget that kids are kids and they don't have like the coping skills or a lot of the communication skills to navigate certain challenges like adults do. And that is part of parenting, is to help them figure out what their best coping strategies are for those moments and keep the line, to your point, of communication open, because that's the best thing that you can do. What you don't want, I think the worst thing to happen is the disconnect between the child then hiding their blood sugars from their parent, or afraid of what their parent would say if they forgot, I don't know, their insulin shot at home, or they're an extra pump site and now they're out at a concert or whatever, and they don't want to call because they're afraid to get in trouble. I think that's where things can get really dicey. But it sounds like you did an amazing job, and that you were really just cognizant of bringing mindfulness and intention into that relationship. Was there anything that you would have, is there anything like that you would have as a tip for a parent who is really just not in a great place with their child, in terms of the child is just resistant to like taking care of themselves? We hear that a lot, and I've spoke a lot on the podcast about that, but curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I would tell your audience that you can't give up on your kid. And that resistance of having, help, wanting help with their blood sugars, just continue to be there and be present for them, and in a non-confrontational way, to continue to ask them questions. And asking questions in a way that doesn't make them feel shame or blame is really helpful to bring an understanding that then goes on to build trust. And so it's not going to change overnight. There's no magic shot or pill that can make someone, want help, but that continual presence will teach them that your love as a parent is not going to go away. I recently was listening to your podcast when you had your dad on, and your dad said, as a dad who doesn't have type 1 diabetes, he'll never understand what it feels like to have a high blood sugar or a low blood sugar. And that is so true. The I, though, would tell you, like, there's other emotions and other feelings that go along with being a parent of a type 1 diabetic too, that other parents don't necessarily feel. And having a community to be able to share frustrations or share tips is so important on this journey because we all have to be there to support one another.
Well, plot twist, Dr. Maureen, you're gonna be shocked by this if you don't already know. So the podcast episode that you listened to was likely the one from last year, I think. Yeah. So if you go back to a couple episodes ago, you'll hear my dad came back on, and he actually has been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So now he is going to really, I know, right?
Know what it
He's
feels like
really gonna know
to
what
for
it feels like.
highs and lows. There you
Exactly.
go.
So I caution all the parents out there who are like, I just want to, I want to know what it feels like for my child to have higher lows. Just ask me, ask Dr. Maureen's daughter. Like, we will gladly share that with you, but do not wish that upon yourself.
Yes. Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah, so that's been a plot twist, but it has been really interesting because it's almost like the things that he instilled in me and the strength that he had, him and my mom both had to, grow. And as they've been on this journey of having a daughter that was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, like, it's almost kind of like this diagnosis now he's much more prepared for. And now I can be that for him. And he already, has that strength. So it's been really fascinating.
I would say it's probably going to bring you guys even closer because
Mhm.
it's kind of like, my daughter wanting being the same like height and weight as me that we can share clothes. So having this kind of commonality between you guys doesn't push you away, it just draws you closer.
Absolutely, 100%. I have a very close family, and he's, my best friend, and now this is, even more of closeness and relatability.
So I have a very quick story. So right before my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, she did a service project at the hospital and became very involved with the therapy dogs that were part of the hospital, became very attached to one of the therapy dogs. She gets diagnosed with diabetes. Archie, the dog, like comes to visit her in the hospital. She thinks it's the best thing ever. Then a month or two later, the handler sees me in the elevator and she's like, "How's your daughter doing?" I'm like, "Oh, she's great." She's like, "Yeah, funny story. Archie got diagnosed with diabetes." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like,
Oh my gosh. Like, of
of
course. And
course.
that's not the first time. I knew you were gonna say that too, because I've heard that story, like,
Yes.
before, where it's like, oh my gosh, like, my dog got diagnosed, or my cat, and it's just like, I don't know, like, I think there's some kind of connection and universe at play, something like that, because, like, what are the chances? Like, it's crazy. But tell me a little bit about your book. Like, I wanna get it, but what inspired you to write it, and what do you think are some of the main parts of it that you share that you think could be good for other parents, to get the book and to be able to read through?
So I started the journey of writing the book because my kids would always ask me, "Hey, mom, like, tell us a story of what happened when Kylie had this, or tell us a story of when you diagnosed diabetes." So I was doing it to kind of document our family stories. But then I realized that the stories that we had in our journey, if we tell them, we can help other families that are going along a similar journey. I mean, this is how we can learn throughout all avenues of life. So the book kind of changed, and I took each chapter, and each chapter is related to a theme. So there's a chapter on fear, a chapter on guilt, a chapter on overwhelm. And each chapter has a story of my daughter when she had cancer, a story of my daughter from her T1D journey, and a story of a patient that I took care of, along with tips that readers can implement in their lives today in regards to that specific theme. And, this is the crazy thing about the book is I thought I was going to write it in a weekend because these are stories that I had told and had lived, and this was going to be a piece of cake. I sat down, Lauren, to write the book, and it was so emotional to kind of go back in time and relive in excruciating detail all of the
Mm.
different aspects of the story so the reader understands what I was going through in that moment. It could not have happened in a weekend because of how emotional it was. And after, a writing session, I would have to close my laptop and like, okay, I need to relax for a minute because this has really kind of been quite a journey on putting this all on paper. When I was done and wrote the last sentence of the book and I closed my laptop for the very last time, I just started crying because I had, through this process of writing, that I had really healed a lot of my own wounds that I didn't even realize needed to be healed. And it has really made it very clear on how important writing can be as a tool for anyone. They don't need to publish a book, but just journaling is such a powerful thing that people can easily take on to better understand themselves and better understand their experience in the world that they're living in.
Absolutely. We have a journal, a physical copy. It's called the Diabetic Health Journal, and we've gotten asked for the past like 8 years, "Hey, can you guys put this in a digital format?" And I'll never say never, but like 99% sure that I never want it to be just another app in your folder on your phone because of that, that mind body connection that happens when you are literally physically writing and journaling and reflecting, and it forces you also to slow down. And so much of emotions comes from it. They're there, but we often push them down and we don't see them, or they don't come out until we actually take this space to slow down, and that's when we can process them. So i I love that that was your experience, and that you can, it can be now a gift for the world.
Yeah. I often talk about how emotions are kind of like a beach ball, that we can take that beach ball and shove it underwater and it can stay underwater if we're holding on to it. But as soon as we let it go, that beach ball's like popping up into the air, right? And our emotions are the same way. Like we keep them repressed. And when they're not being processed, that they come out in odd ways sometimes. And that process of writing is very much a tool for being able to process emotions. So I love what you just said about writing, physically writing and becoming kind of an objective person who can see what's going on in their mind becomes so important sometimes.
Absolutely. So, if for everybody listening, that is your homework assignment from myself and Dr. Maureen. It is to take a blank canvas, a blank pen, piece of paper, and write down just your feelings. And it can be scary, but do it without judgment. Don't worry about doing it perfect or full sentences. Just write, whatever comes to mind. It could be really healing. Dr. Maureen, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I feel like there were so many golden nuggets that you shared throughout this episode that I know so many caregivers are really going to anchor onto and just, take back into their everyday. Can you share a little bit about where people can connect with you, where they can get your book, Reclaiming Life? We'd love to leave them with that.
So my website is maureenmichellemd.com, and it's Michelle with one L. And the book is on Amazon. It's called Reclaiming Life by Maureen Michelle. I would love for your audience to check it out. And I'm so appreciative of you for having me on, but also for the work that you do. And helping T1Ds is so needed. I wish you continuous luck, and I hope your dad really finds joy in your work now because he needs it.
Oh my gosh, I wholeheartedly receive that. Thank you so much. And I have the same sentiments about you. We need more physicians who have a personal connection to people with type 1 diabetes because it just completely changes the type of care that, the our community is able to receive. So I have no doubt that your patients that you see with type 1 diabetes and their families are so lucky to have you. Yeah, just thank you for being you. Thank you so much for being here with me today and listening to this episode of Reclaim Your Rise. To let us know that the episodes we're putting out are impactful and to help us get our street cred up and let everyone else know that this is something worthy of their time to listen to, please leave a rating and review on our Apple Podcast, send the show to other people impacted by T1D or maybe even your doctor, and share it on social media tagging at Risley Health and at Lauren_Bongiorno. New episodes of Reclaim Your Rise come out every single Tuesday, so make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that you never miss a beat. Thanks again for listening, and as always, remember, diabetes is a challenge that we did not choose, but one that we can rise above.